Entwined is a podcast about how so much of the world around us is wound or twisted together. This podcast strives to bear unexposed or indiscernible connections using historical and anecdotal sources. I am P.S. McKay, and along with Elliot Gladstone, this is Entwined. Before we begin, a few things to discuss. If you like the show, take a moment to rate us really quickly on iTunes. More high rankings allow us more exposure, and more exposure brings you more material. Secondly, head on over to History Goes Bump podcast and download their episode titled Episode 175, The Santa Maria Inn. Our own Elliot Gladstone is interviewed and shares his own paranormal experience while staying there one fateful night. It's a great listen, even though the term freaky pants may have been mentioned one too many times. And finally, if you want to do more than just rate the show, please visit our Patreon page where you can become a member and donate some money to the production that technically makes you a producer for the show. And who wouldn't want that title? We offer several free benefits, such as an extra behind-the-scenes fireside chat between myself and Elliot, and a PDF of the transcripts of the shows as they air. So take a look at patreon.com/entwinedpodcast and look into becoming a member of the team. And stay twined. I recently came upon a broadcast of the 1993 movie The Sandlot. I was about the cast's age when it first came out, and it struck a nerve with me. 24 years ago, the world was very similar to 1963 in kid terms. Sure, there were some differences, and I was watching back then on a color TV. Computers were around, but only a few people in your class had them at that point, and if they wanted to show off, would do their homework on the word processor program. And video games were entering a new golden age with Super Nintendo, Sega, and Game Boy, and they were able to distract us and our friends for hours, taking turns on who else was going to Hadouken on Street Fighter. But given those technological differences, we still didn't have an all-access level of entertainment that kids do now. At some point, we got bored, there was nothing on TV, and we would go outside and play for hours. I recognized that aspect of life portrayed in 1963. The hot summer days when there was nothing on TV, and all you could do was find your own entertainment. Now, the idea at the time of playing baseball all day was abhorrent to me, but I still got the vibes of the goodwill and the free fun. I was wondering if such a movie would be good exposure to my 6-year-old. Now, before I go further, the version we watched was the broadcast version. There were no swear words. And while I think he would have been very interested in the third act, where the kids were faced with the impossible in trying to get that autographed ball back from the Beast, I didn't think the movie would entertain him enough in the beginning to hold his interest. We are in a world of 24/7 non-stop entertainment on demand at your fingertips. And of course, there are limits we place on it, but that doesn't mean that kind of instant gratification wouldn't have affected my son's attention span. I was pleasantly surprised to discover he did get interested early on, and he enjoyed it immensely, just as much as I remember loving this movie growing up. And it had such a great message of camaraderie, learning your limits, and standing up in the face of the impossible. What really stood out for me, though, and this was something that I latently forgot over the years, was the fact that Benny the Jet, near the end, was ready to sacrifice himself to save his friend's ball. After all their attempts failed, with simply using a broken handle to grab the ball, to using vacuums to erector sets and remote-controlled rovers, it became clear to Benny that it was going to have to come down to him. And if he couldn't do it, he was going to go down fighting the beast trying. If you haven't seen the movie, I recommend it. But the mentality was that the beast had killed numerous burglars and a child years before. Benny jumping into that backyard to grab the ball was certain death. And as he stood there, putting on his brand new PF Flyers, the grown Smalls narrated something to this extent. Everyone, at some point in their life, is faced with a moment where they can become a legend. The problem is, most people don't recognize it, even if it's spit on their shoes, or they were too afraid to take the chance. And I sat there, watching Benny jump the fence into the beast's domain, wondering, was I ever in a position to be legendary? To take that chance? Did I recognize it? And if I missed it, is there redemption? It was May 3rd, 2016. The high deserts of northern Iraq. It was the beginning of the third year of a campaign against ISIS fighters that held that territory with an iron grip since the retreat of the Iraqi army in 2014. U.S. Special Forces were in the area to assist Kurdish troops in advisement capacities. The attack happened about 3 to 5 kilometers behind enemy lines, near the town of Teleskov, about 30 kilometers north of the ISIS stronghold of Mosul. ISIS militants broke through into the position using 3 truck bombs and ingeniously following them with bulldozers to clear the wreckage away for their forces to advance in. There was a petty officer that was part of a 20-man team that went to assist under heavy fire and rescue a dozen U.S. advisors and reinforce the Kurdish Peshmerga force there. 31 airstrikes were called in to push back the ISIS forces. During that time, the SEALs ran low on ammunition, and the petty officer's machine gun malfunctioned. In response, he ran to a nearby coalition vehicle to get a new weapon and additional ammunition. He found a sniper rifle and climbed on top of a building to gain a good vantage point. He fired upon the ISIS line. All told, after the battle, ISIS was repelled, having lost 58 of their militants and 20 vehicles. But the petty officer was struck by enemy fire. Despite the medevac to base, he was declared dead. Having fought off the enemy under such straining conditions, and even gaining a different lookout with a weapon he was not originally handed, he kept fighting to the end to save those 12 U.S. advisors and numerous Kurdish troops, to keep the battle going against the scourge that had ensnared northern Iraq. In the birthplace of human civilization, he died, trying to help that civilization thrive once more. Arizona is a hot and very dry state. If you're not careful, you can get stuck on the sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon in June while wearing flip-flops. I know this from personal experience. One of the interesting things about Arizona is that it is of an artificial settlement plan. I made that term up, but here's what I mean. Without the advent of modern air conditioning, the recent explosion in the population in Phoenix and Tucson areas would never have happened. But with it, new cheap land was available for development in an area that would have been worthless in the first place. And that is where Charles Keating Jr. made his home. It is where he made his opportunity. He was born in December of 1923, a champion swimmer at the University of Cincinnati in the 40s. He entered into the political realm by founding Citizens of Decent Literature and served as a member of the 1969 President's Commission for Obscenity and Pornography. It was during that time where he was able to gain extra clout with several long-time and up-and-coming politicians. In 1976, Keating moved to Phoenix to run a real estate firm called American Continental Homes. It was a spin-off of a company owned by his first and sole client, Carl Linder. They had developed a natural partnership over the previous decade, and Keating represented him in his business dealings, covering him through several SEC inquiries for some questionable investment choices. Keating took over the small, struggling company as it was losing money trying to stay in the market. He took the opportunity to add various positions and divisions to the company in a structure that was similar to American Financial. As the company grew, acquiring assets rapidly, he relied heavily upon his family to help run the different divisions, his son being one of those that rose quickly to a prominent position. With success in real estate in a major metropolitan area for a state, so comes clout. Keating served as head of fundraising for John Connolly's campaign in the 1980 Republican Party presidential nomination. Despite his business contacts, he struggled to gather money for the campaign, and Connolly eventually had to back out of the race. But not without raising a few eyebrows, to the point where newly elected Reagan offered Keating a position as ambassador to the Bahamas. Which makes you stop and think for a second. This is a side note, and one that I would want you to think about. One would think that in order to become a U.S. ambassador, one would have to go through grueling years of political science training and education. Only the most educated and wittiest could serve. And that's what I thought. I mean, I saw the wheeling and dealing that was represented in the movie 13 Days about the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was a strategic game of chess. They played moves 3 moves out, if you can follow that. But alas, in reality, that is not how it works in real life. Sure, Keating was an educated man, having become a lawyer and earning millions in real estate dealings. It takes a certain intelligence to be able to pull that off. It's just not the same intelligence that I thought. As it turns out, Keating had spent considerable time in the Bahamas and was familiar with the government there and the local businesses. So he was a good choice. He was dropped from consideration, but I suppose the lesson here is it all depends on who you know to get those positions. Getting back on track, American Continental at its peak would have $6 billion in assets, a large number of subsidiaries, 2,500 employees, and headquarters complex in Phoenix's Camelback Road. It's a main thoroughfare through the city. He was a pious man, donating millions to church organizations as well as Mother Teresa's operations. He even lent her his helicopter when she came to visit local Native American reservations in the state. Father Bruce Ritter of the Covenant House said of Keating, quote, "He makes you believe in providence," end quote. It was a common theme. Keating was a well-liked boss who encouraged camaraderie in the workforce that further spread inspiration and motivation for hard work. 1984 was the beginning of the end for Keating's empire, though. His company, American Continental, bought Lincoln Savings and Loan Association for just over $50 million. Prior to that year, Lincoln had been a conservatively run enterprise, having about half its assets in home loans, with only a quarter of those being considered at risk. Keating took over the firm when savings and loans became deregulated. He later said that he got into Lincoln because he knew the business inside out and always felt that if the rules were relaxed a little, savings and loans could be the biggest moneymakers in the world. Over the next 4 years, Lincoln's assets quintupled to $5.5 billion. The investments took form in buying large swaths of land, taking equity positions in real estate development projects, and buying high-yield junk bonds. It was later found that a sales document from this period urged staff to, quote, always remember the weak, meek, and ignorant are always good targets, end quote. Sound familiar at all? This was the mid-80s, but I swear this could have been from the early to mid-2000s. Weird. And as we should expect, the bottom fell out of the market. But Lincoln kept trying to hide the losses and was found by investigators to have exceeded the amount of direct investments limit by more than $600 million. And Keating, for what it was worth, felt that the government was out to get him. He employed, get this, private economist Alan Greenspan to confirm that direct investments were not harmful. The same Alan Greenspan that would be appointed to the head of the Federal Reserve in the 90s. And he was wrong. By 1989, American Continental went bankrupt, and Lincoln was seized by the government. All told, about 23,000 customers were left with worthless bonds. Many of them were living in California retirement communities, losing their entire life savings. Total bondholder loss was estimated between $250 million to $288 million. Keating was indicted in California for duping customers into buying worthless junk bonds and was sent to jail, being convicted in 1991 for fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. Now this gives me pause. Remember how Mother Teresa was given free use of Keating's helicopter and benefited from millions in donations? Well, she personally asked the court to show leniency to the man in recognition of the considerable sums he had donated to her charitable organizations. She asked for leniency for a man whose company wantonly went out of its way to prey upon the elderly, to invest in junk bond assets. A man who stole whole retirement savings. I guess I just don't understand the power of money and how it can affect even someone who would be coronated as a saint in 2 decades. But apparently money talks. And my struggle with that is this. I can't tell if she was being a true person who stood by her principles and turned the other cheek to see the salvation in Keating, which makes me a bad person for being mad at him, wanting justice to be served for his treachery, or if she truly was a hypocrite. Or are they one and the same? In the end, Charles Keating Jr. was sentenced to the maximum 10 years in prison in California. Superior Court Judge Lance Ito, yes, that one, quoted Woody Guthrie, saying, quote, more people have suffered from the point of a fountain pen than from a gun, end quote. Numerous other suits ordered him to pay restitution between $122 million to $4.3 billion. But it was all for naught. Keating was broke and $10 million in debt, having no hidden assets to pick from. To top it off, Judge Ito was found to have given the jury improper instructions at his trial, and Keating's conviction was overturned in 1996. He was sentenced to time served and went home after 4.5 years in prison. He never had to go back to jail again after a plea bargain was reached in 1999. Charles lived out the remainder of his years in the Phoenix area. He worked as a business consultant and even dipped his toe into the real estate market after prison. But he made a point to keep a low profile, no longer one for the spotlight. In March of 2014, Charles Keating Jr. passed away from an undisclosed illness, which brings me to the idea of redemption. I have no idea how he felt in his final years, given how Keating felt that he was unfairly targeted by the federal government in the first place. I can only imagine if he felt any remorse for what his company's actions did to so many innocent people. Could he sleep at night? Could he wake up in the morning and be proud of the man he saw in the mirror? Remember, everyone, and I mean everyone, has an opportunity in their life to be great, to be legendary. One must wonder if Keating felt satisfied that he indeed became a legend in his own right. But at what cost? His life, his marriage, his reputation were gone. I don't know how I would feel about that. I do know this. We are all masters of our own destiny, and we do not bleed to be hobbled by the sins of our own fathers in order to make the life we want, the proper life we want moving forward. Petty Officer First Class Charles Keating IV was haunted by his grandfather's past. Even his much too soon death, his grandfather was a side note in the announcement of his passing. But he died a hero. That day, under the hot sun in the Iraqi desert, doing what he swore to do. The SEAL Code is as follows: loyalty to country, team, and teammate. Serve with honor and integrity on and off the battlefield. Ready to lead, ready to follow, never quit. Take responsibility for your actions and the actions of your teammates. Excel as warriors through discipline and innovation. Train for war. Fight to win. Defeat our nation's enemies. Earn your trident every day. And I will never assume Petty Officer Keating's motivation for joining the armed services, whether it was to redeem his family name or blaze his own trail. I will say this: Charles Keating IV died with honor and was a hero trying to save those civilians. And he lived up to every single statement of the Navy SEAL Code. He found his chance to be great, and he earned it. And we must never forget that. Thank you for listening. Entwined is a podcast that releases every other week, and is written, recorded, and produced by P.S. McKay and Elliot Gladstone. This episode was written by P.S. McKay. Please tune in next time to see what Elliot Gladstone has in store for us. For more information about the show and the authors, please check out entwinedpodcast.com. or visit our Twitter page at Entwined Podcast.